You really can't get to know someone during an interview process. It's really
Right.
impossible.
This is the Leadership Foundry podcast. I'm the host this week, Brandon Smith, and our guest today is Josh Hartmann. He is the CEO of NexMetro Communities, a really exciting business, fast-growing business based out in Phoenix, Arizona, and they build housing that then they rent. So it's an interesting hybrid of both developer, but also kind of multifamily. And Josh has been kind of in this space for most of his career. He's going to share his story with you. But what stands out for me about Josh is really two things. First, his humility. You'll hear us talk a lot about humility, and I really want you to listen to how humility plays out in his business and how it attracts others that have that. Second, Josh has really started to master kind of leading and growing an entrepreneurial business. He came from a big business, and then he became the first employee in the business that he's in today. So we really get to learn about what it means to be a leader in a growing entrepreneurial business. So listen close to not only humility, but also entrepreneurial leadership. Josh really has a lot to give us, and I can't wait for the conversation. Josh, really excited to have you on the Leadership Foundry podcast. Excited to just get to spend some more time with you, my friend. You know, of course, you and I know each other well, but for my listeners today, I would love for you to just share a little bit more about your leadership journey. And in particular, maybe a good starting place, talk about your role that you've got today. And then maybe we can walk back in time and share a little bit about kind of what ultimately got you here.
Sure. Well, today I'm the CEO of NexMetro Communities. We're the developer of what's called the built-to-rent space these days. So we build single-family homes that we rent. We've been in business for about 10 years, actually almost 11 years. And I was the first employee, and I was brought on as the managing partner 10 years ago by the founders, which is my board of directors. And so we've grown from one individual in a backroom closet to I think we have 65 employees now, and we are in 8 markets.
Wow, that's really exciting. I never knew you were officially employee number one.
I was officially employee number one. Actually, I'll probably quote something that happened in my initial interview that's relevant to this discussion today at some point. But yeah, I was. They decided to form the company in late 2012, and then I came on board through a recruiter, strangely, in 2013, early 2013.
Nice. So let's go back even prior to that. So before NexMetro, employee number one, up to CEO, what ultimately got you set and ready for this kind of role? What was your first portion of your career?
Yeah, I had an interesting transition in my career. So I started out, I'll kind of start from the beginning. When I left school, my background is I have a geological engineering degree, which is a unusual degree. It's part of civil engineering. And I wanted to be an environmental consultant, and I was out to save the world. And that was kind of my first 3 or 4 years of my career, but I realized that I didn't really enjoy it. It wasn't something that really piqued my interest because, as is often the case in careers, it sounds better on paper than it actually is in reality. But fortunately, I had a mentor who kept track of me. He was my first mentor in my first company in consulting, and he had gone on to do real estate development with a company called Del Webb, which is a large master plan community developer in the Southwest, but pretty well known across the country. And he said, I think you should come work for me. I'm going to go start with a new company that's doing a 7,000 acre master plan community here in Phoenix, and I think you would love development and much more than you like environmental engineering. So I took that leap, went from a relatively small company. I think the office I was in at that time had about 6 people in it, and I was the low man in the totem pole, to a larger company, kind of regional, that had about 60 employees, and kind of working my way up the corporate scale, I guess. So worked for that company for a few years. Worked my way up the chain. So I came in as a junior engineer, worked my way up to a project manager or director of land development. And then the same person who had hired me there had left and gone back to Pulte Homes, which had acquired Del Webb, and wanted to take me there. And I'll never forget the guy who was my employer at that time. He was one of the top 3 people at the company, he kind of gave me a hard time. He said, "Are you going to just follow this guy around your entire career, or are you going to break out on your own at some point?" And I kind of had to laugh, and I said, "Yeah, it's been going pretty good so far, so I think I'll keep following him." And so I went to Pulte, so kind of up the next notch, right? Pulte probably had about 3,000 employees, maybe more at that time. Actually, I'm sorry, it had 3,000 employees in Arizona. It probably had 50 or 60,000 employees total. And that's where I started to learn about the corporate culture. And I think that's probably where I refined my leadership skills the most, because, larger corporations tend to invest more in the development of their future leaders. Smaller companies tend to just kind of do it by watching and learning, right? And so I had lots of opportunities for expanding my leadership skills and different leadership opportunities at Pulte.
So, interesting hearing your journey this way, because what struck me just hearing you talk about today is you start off almost like a subject matter expert, a little more around technical skills. And then at some point along the lines, you started pivoting more into people management and leadership. Was that a conscious choice that you made, or did that just kind of evolve?
It just kind of evolved. I'm a very, as you know, I'm a pretty programmatic brain. I'm a very engineer-like brain, and so I like processes. But I think that when I went to Pulte, they put me in charge of a team for the first time, and they were assembling a new team for this project that I was working on. And I was able to kind of put everything together, and I started realizing that I really liked being a leader as well, and helping grow people and mentor them, and kind of do some of the things for people that have been done for me in my past, and encourage their development. So, but I was able to somewhat use both, because I was such a subject matter expert, to your point, in kind of the environmental and engineering side, and I had done a lot of regulatory work, that I was able to parlay that into being very thoughtful and structural in how I was a leader, in terms of just thinking through, if this, then this, right? How is this going to help my team grow? How is this going to help my business grow? And so I think I just kind of fell into it in some regards, that I really started enjoying leading individuals.
Okay, so let's go on to the real main purpose of this show, which is leadership lessons. So what were some of the early leadership lessons that have stuck with you, that made a big impact, that are still influencing how you lead today?
I think the biggest lesson that I've learned, when thinking back to the people that I've worked for, so I've worked for great leaders, and I've worked for average leaders, and I've worked for leaders that I think were maybe a little bit below average. And the one consistent thing I've seen in great leaders is they're somewhat selfless in how they approach their leadership. So one of the best leaders I ever had was the division president at Pulte when I went there. And you could really sense that he cared about his people, and he was very consistent in his actions, so that you could rely upon what he was going to do. You knew he was going to do the right thing. You saw him doing the right thing. You saw him seeing and acting in a consistent way. So you could see really, he began to create that trust. And I think from my perspective, trust is the most important part of leadership, because if people don't trust you, they're not going to follow you. And versus people who I saw early in my career who acted in one way, or said one thing and then acted in a different way, right? And immediately you start to lose trust in that person. You're saying, well, if they'll do that with someone else, if they'll treat a vendor or a partner that way, then what's to stop them from treating me that way? And so I really think that I try and instill that in my leadership style, is that people know that I'm going to say and do the same things, right? Have integrity in my actions, and also behave in a way that they can be proud of, right? If you're doing underhanded things, or they see you mistreating people, then they're going to, that reflects on how you're going to treat them. And so I think that's just kind of important skill, or important leadership trait to have.
So then when you moved into, so it's an interesting journey, right? We go smaller, bigger, and then big, really big, and then to one, and then to one, right? And then it was just you. And then it moved up to 65. So when you then went from 30,000 to one, okay, and then you started to be part of this growing, building, exciting business, what were some things you learned in that regard? I mean, I bet that was a challenging time because, you know, when you're we think of startup and entrepreneurial leadership, I mean, you got to wear a lot of hats in the beginning. I mean, you're kind of every function when it's just you, and then over time, you peel some of those off. You get some talented folks around you. But what were some things you learned in the early years of NexMetro?
Yeah, it was funny. We said that, I'd work on projects all day, and then I would have to do the dishes before I went home at night, right? Because there was no one else to do the dishes
Right.
In the lunchroom, right? So you kind of wear all the hats and do all the things. One of the things that stands out to me is as we grew, we would hire subject matter experts, right? And bring them in, but we'd make them wear multiple different hats, or I guess I would make them wear multiple different hats. And what I found was as we got bigger, those folks would start to struggle because they're trying to manage too broad of an area of the business. And they were really subject matter experts. And then we would bring in someone who was an expert in an area that they were not as strong in, but we saw ourselves lagging. And that part of our business would just take off and it would become so much stronger. And so one lesson was making sure that you're paying attention to if people have gotten over their skis in their role, and then bring in, not criticizing them for that because they're just wearing too many hats, right? Bring in someone who can take the burden of the area where they have weakness, or just aren't as strong. I should say weakness, just aren't as strong. That takes that off. And then both that new person and the person who is struggling start to flourish, right? And so that's something I kind of try to continue to do through the organization. But I think that the big lesson in coming from a big company to what we did at NexMetro is it's just different being a leader when you're an owner of the company, right? Versus being in a large organization like Pulte, where in some regards your role as a leader is to just get to the next level of leadership, right? You're kind of, there's politics and there's moves you're trying to make just for the purpose of moving up in the organization. Versus when you're the leader of a company that you're an owner in, you're really thinking more like an owner and in all facets, like what is best for the company. Whereas I think sometimes that gets lost in larger companies where you're trying to work your way up that leadership train. And so it more aligns you with the business, which is just a different leadership mentality, right? You're just more conscious of what is good for the business versus what is good for me.
So does it work to say leaders should be thinking more like an owner, or does that not always work in every situation?
I think that that's the best way to approach it in every situation. But I think that for better or worse, it's you can move up in an organization that's a large organization by playing some of those, politics and relational things, et cetera, because you can hide behind a more opaque performance, right? You're part of a big machine. And so the machine kind of defines, the performance of the organization. And so I think it works better in an organization like this one, which is smaller. You just can't hide behind that, right? It's pretty clear if you're not performing in your leadership role. And that was pretty evident as well, I think, during the great financial crisis with large companies. I think Warren Buffett likes to say, when the tide moves out, you find out who's not wearing the bathing suits. That kind of happened during that time, as it exposed who wasn't actually able to do the work as a leader, right? They were just kind of pure managers, and as long as they had enough people below them, they could kind of manage their part of the organization. But once they had to actually do something themselves, it became pretty evident who was able to do that, and those were typically the people who were able to survive. So to your question earlier, those people also tend to think like owners, right? You're thinking about how can I improve my part of the business, how can I make it better, versus just thinking about how can I create the impression that I'm doing a good job. I guess I don't know if I'm doing a good job of making that distinction, but it's kind of.
Brother, you're speaking my language because you and I have talked about author editor, And when I think about the author, and when we're wearing the author hat, we take ownership, we show initiative, we display critical thinking.
Right.
Which, who doesn't want that on their team, right?
Right.
And those are the people who are often our rock stars that we say, oh yeah, give them more opportunities, promote them. I mean, look at how they, we don't have to tell them what to do. They're already off and running.
Right. Right. They're making things happen on their own versus you giving them direction all the time.
So something also interesting. So I've gotten to have the opportunity, the really wonderful opportunity to watch you all grow over the last few years. It's been really exciting. And you've got some really talented leaders on your team that I've got a chance to spend time with. Now, what's interesting is some of them started off as contractors or folks that you hired in that way, and then they moved over into full-time.
Yes.
Is that, I think so quickly leaders move into, well, you just hire somebody full-time. And there might be a time and place for that. But is there value in kind of starting off the relationship a little more dating before we marry? I mean, I'm curious, as you look back in time, is that a strategy you might recommend, or was it more specific to your unique business and the time and place you all were?
I love that strategy. I mean, I think it's when you can pull it off, and it's not always possible, but we've done it several times. Now, as a growth company, it makes it a little bit easier because when we enter a new market, we can say, to say the managing director of that market that we're talking with, hey, why don't we, you'll work for us part-time. We probably don't have a full-time role for you right now, and you can do other things, but we'll give you a good compensation and et cetera. And then if it only takes, 6 months, and you pretty quickly realize that they want to be with the company, and you realize you want them to be with the company, and now you can kind of make it official. I think it's a really effective way to do it, especially with a growth company or a smaller, startup type company like NexMetro, because it just eliminates that pressure of, you really can't get to know someone during an interview process. It's really impossible, right? Everyone's kind of, it's just like dating, as you kind of described, right? It's like on the first, second, third, and fourth date, everyone's behaving. But maybe on the 6th or 10th date, you start to realize what the real person is. And so I like it it lets everyone kind of be themselves, because they don't feel like they have to behave in a certain way. They're like, listen, you're free to date other people. We're free to date other people.
Yeah.
But let's see if this relationship works. And it's worked more times for us than it hasn't. I can say that.
So I don't have an answer to this. Maybe there isn't an answer, but I'm going to throw out the question anyway. Why do you think leaders don't always do that? Why do you think there's such this reflexive reaction? We got to offer full-time with benefits, and because then that becomes really challenging after week 3 when you realize, actually, this isn't the person that I saw on their Tinder profile. Like, this is not who I thought I was going to get. Like, they're a lot shorter than what I was expecting, right? Or whatever.
Where'd they get that filter?
Yeah, exactly. And then now unwinding that can be a little more challenging for everybody involved, including the employee, versus a contractor where you say, hey, no harm, no foul. This was a really great experience for both of us, and I wish you the best. So a little different. So I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
That's a great question. I believe part of that is probably a fear that person, what else are they doing? What are they doing on the side, right? Are they making a bunch of money doing something? Are they working for our competitor?
Oh.
It's like, are they mine, right? Are we exclusive, even though we're not exclusive, right? It's kind of one of those. It's probably like you extending the dating kind of example. It's like, are we both exclusive, or is just one of us exclusive? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's the great disalignment, but and also the transition. I'll just use an example. So Brian Rosenbaum, who's our chief development officer, who you know very well, he started out as a consultant to us because I knew Brian from a previous life, and he was running a consulting firm. And after about 6 months, I said, hey, Brian, I think we've got enough work now. He was running our Phoenix operations. So I think we've got enough work now. I really need someone full time and not have these other distractions. And he said, well, that makes sense. Well, actually, the funny thing, the first thing he said to me is, well, I don't know if I really want to go back to working for a company. I said, well, what's your hesitation? And by the way, at this time we had like 6 or 7 employees. So it wasn't like we were this massive organization. And he said, I really want to be able to, I like the freedom, and I really want to be able to take my kid to soccer. practice, in the afternoon and not have to worry about somebody, watching the clock on me. And I said, Brian, you know me, I don't care when you work or, how you get things done. I just want you to get things done. And so that made up his mind. But then the challenge we had at that point was he had all these clients and he was making revenue off of them. And he didn't want to break the contract with them. He said, I really want to finish these contracts out because A, I want to do what I said I was going to do. And B, or two, it's a lot of money for me. And I said, no problem. But I think a lot of companies would say, I don't like that. I want you to only work, I want you to only make money from me. And I've always kind of had the philosophy, as long as someone's getting their job done, if they want to do something on the side that isn't a conflict, why not let them do that and make a little bit extra money? And then at some point, hopefully they realize, which Brian did, there was more money to be had on this side and it was a lot more fun. And I think it's beholden upon a leader on a company on making someone feel like their job is worthwhile and enjoyable and valuable. It's not the employee's job to do that. And if you do that, and if you're able to accomplish that, then they're going to want to come and work full time for you if there's an alignment of personalities and interests, et cetera. So I think that's why we've had success, is just making this a great place to work. And once people see the inside, especially people who have been in the industry for a while, they want to be a part of it. And it's just that transition period.
So what I love also what you said there is it's so ironic, because what you did was you said, hey, take all the freedom in the world that you need. I trust you completely. And then in return was you got loyalty and commitment.
Right.
Versus most companies say, no, you must be loyal and committed. And then so those people push back and become rebellious and want more freedom. Yeah. And, so it's almost by giving them space, you got what you needed and wanted out of that. And he did too. And that story has been true for everybody I speak to at NexMetro.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just like life, right? I mean, if you give someone freedom and you treat people the way you want to be treated, then they appreciate it and it comes back to you. And I think that's very much the case with business. I think the big problem that companies have is they expect loyalty and they expect commitment, but they don't themselves display loyalty and commitment. To my first point, right? If an employee team member sees that you're kind of putting pressure on them for this commitment and like give up your life for the company, but then they see you treating other employees without that kind of level of commitment, they see the irony, they see the hypocrisy right away, and it just undermines your leadership, I think, immediately. So, and I think our team, part of what our team has seen is our commitment to providing coaches to people who need improvement, right? I mean, it's like, we don't just let people go because they're underperforming. We say, hey, this person has potential, but they've got a few things they need to work on. Let's get them a coach and see if we can bring them around. And we've had success more times than we haven't. And that shows people our commitment to our employees and people we think have talent. So anyways, I think it all comes back to that, display the traits that you want to see in other people. And that's what you'll end up with as an organization. So
I'm going to change analogies a little bit and go down the path you're starting to go down. You mentioned before, when people really get to experience NexMetro and the culture, they more often than not want to stay. They love it. It's great. So now we're going to use kind of a cooking in the kitchen kind of analogy. And without revealing all of your secret ingredients, what is it? What's part of the special sauce that makes the culture so great? At least as you sit here today and you think about it, that people say, wow, I could really see myself here long term. Or in some cases, I have some folks that I've talked to there that said, I could retire now if I wanted to. I don't want to because I love what we're doing right now. So, you got people that have options that want to stay and are passionate to be part of NexMetro. So I'm curious, what's part of that secret sauce, Josh?
Geez, you probably know this better than I do. So I'll probably turn the question right back to you at the end. I think it's, well, one thing is we talk a lot about humility and how, we just don't, if you have a big ego, you're not going to last at NexMetro. You're just not, right? If you're the kind of person that likes to take credit, the kind of person that's always kind of trying to get the light shown on you, I think you're just not going to fit, because from top to bottom, we just have people that are pretty humble and see everyone as equals, right? And it's pretty clear when someone comes in that doesn't fit that mold. And I'll tell you, we have people that voluntarily leave from this organization because they're just like, I'm just not a fit, either culturally, from a personality standpoint, or also we're just a very high performing company, and there's high expectations of work output, and sometimes we have people say that I just can't keep up, right? I just can't. I love this place, but I don't have the ability, or I don't have the desire to work at the level that this company's working at. So I think that but that makes it a fun place to work, right? If you feel like you can walk into the CEO's office at any time and talk to him about, the car you just bought, right? And he's actually going to listen and care and ask you some questions because he's a car guy, which happened to me last week. That makes you feel like you're part of a family, part of a real team. But if you don't feel like you have that access, or someone's just too good or too cool or too high up the food chain to have a conversation with you, why would you want to stay at a place like that, right? You want a place that you feel appreciated. So I think I feel like that's the main key. And I think that I'd be interested what your thoughts are, but across the leadership team, there's not someone who I could say has a huge ego. Well, I'll put it differently. My wife will tell you I have a huge ego, right? But I also appreciate people, right? And I know that I'm not perfect.
But you're humble enough to let her tell you.
Yeah. She keeps me. What's my secret? It's my wife. She keeps me humble, and my brother. But I think it's everyone kind of has a certain humility within our leadership team that runs itself through the course of the business.
I think all those are true. I don't have much to add. The only thing else I would add is, and not every business I don't think can create this. Maybe they can, but there's just a sense of growing and growth.
5 minutes.
Like people can look around and say, if I want to do something bigger or different, that's going to be possible for me here in a year or 2 years or 3 years. Yeah. It's not static. I'm not stuck in kind of a government job that is going to be the next 20 years. I'm doing the same thing that's just not the nature of your business. It's so dynamic, which might be unsettling for some, but for others, it's exciting. It's growth.
Right.
So I do want to dig in on the humility piece, because so many businesses say we want to hire people who are humble. We want humility. I mean, what business wouldn't say that, right? Most businesses would say that or give at least lip service to it. But it's hard to tease that out, particularly in an interview. So have you found any tricks and tips? Was there things that you would do in interviews that you were listening for or looking for that would lead you to say, oh, this is a little different?
I used to have a technique I used, and it failed me gloriously about 2 years ago. So I'm not going to share that one.
But there came a time it didn't work?
Yeah. So here's my question that I often still always ask in interviews is, tell me 3 people whose lives you've influenced, through your career. And what I'm looking for is someone who describes people who were at a lower level than them that they help bring up, whether it's, not necessarily somebody who works for them, but, I've had people describe receptionists that they saw potential in, and they helped them get into some other part of the business, and now that person is is a marketing VP somewhere, right? So that's the kind of story I'm looking for, is this selfless. I had no reason to help this person, but that's just my nature, right? The person you're not looking for is the person who gives you 3 people who they worked for, or were the boss's bosses, right? Because that's kind of a person who's going to be focused up versus focused down and helping others, which I think takes a certain amount of humility. But I asked that question in a specific meeting for someone who was going to work for me, or in their interview process, and they gave me probably the best answer I've ever had. And I was like, man, this person's perfect. And then they came on board, and they completely were the opposite. They were completely, putting other people down and trying to be very politic, and so that doesn't always work. To your point earlier, I mean, interviews are interviews, right? You're on your best behavior, et cetera. But I think what I like to do is have individuals interview with different levels within the organization, and kind of see if someone starts to sense a little bit of elitism in person, right? Maybe you have an interview with, maybe if it's I can't think of a specific example, but if we're hiring like a vice president of development, maybe we have them meet with our AP, manager, our accounts payable manager, just because they're going to work together, and just kind of, and preferably have it, if it's the development industry is a very male centric business. I want to make sure that person interviews with a woman. I want to make sure that person interviews with someone of a different ethnicity that they have. And does anyone get a little bit of a sense of, did I feel a little bit like that person didn't totally respect me in that meeting, that they maybe weren't paying attention? The other thing I like to do is I always ask our front desk person how they were treated when the person came in.
Yeah.
Which is usually pretty good. I mean, usually folks are relatively sensitive, but as they go through the interview process and they get more comfortable, their real personality starts to come out, right? And I'm certainly not going to get the real personality when I interview them. They're going to be on their best possible behavior. So my interview is really more of a sales pitch to come to work at NexMetro than it's about trying to figure out, who they are. Although I do try and get people to relax a little bit, and maybe I'll even make a little bit of a comment to see if they grab that hook of see if they jump on a kind of a somewhat egocentric type of comment, and see if they kind of jump on that and get excited and light up. And it's like, okay, this person gets a little bit too excited about power or whatever, that kind of thing.
Right. So I can't believe we're already getting close to time. And so I want to take a lot of your lessons and I'm going to roll it into today. So when you think about today and leadership today, whether it's within kind of your industry and world, or just even more broadly, what would be one tip or trick or practical piece of advice you might have for leaders today that they could start doing tomorrow that would make them better as leaders, in however way you want to define better?
One tip or trick? That's a good question. This one's very simple, but it's very pertinent to today. Is being present when you talk to your team members. So whether it's on a Zoom or on a phone call or just they're sitting in your office, I think there's nothing more disheartening for someone, a team member, than to be talking to a leader and that leader not listening to them, right? You're on your computer, they're talking, but you're kind of checking your emails or whatever. And so I make a very strong effort to, when I'm on a Zoom call or whether someone's in my office, I put everything else away. I'm not on my phone. I'm not looking at my emails. I try and be present for those people because it shows them you appreciate them, for one. And for two, it saves you a lot of time. That's for sure, right? There's messages you miss when you think you're multitasking. But I just feel like that, and quite frankly, whether it's with your kids or your spouse or your team members, right? It's all the same thing. Being present for them, letting them know that they're important enough for you to set everything else aside and spend time with them. That's probably a pretty quick and easy way to become a better leader pretty quickly.
I'm going to go back on something you just said right there at the end. Quick and easy, and yet require so much intentionality and discipline.
Yeah.
Because we're getting so much noise thrown at us all the time. And I know you are, particularly in the seat you sit in as CEO. You're going to get a lot of things coming your way. So just to have the ability to kind of figuratively or literally block that out and hone in on one person for 30 minutes or 20 minutes or 10 minutes or 5 minutes is, really important discipline, but also a real gift. So I know that makes a difference. Well, Josh, brother, this was fantastic. Thank you for coming on the show today. I really, really appreciate it. I appreciate all your insights. There was actually some things here that you and I haven't ever really talked about. So it was really good to hear you kind of articulate those. It was really gave me a new perspective into the things that really make up your secret sauce and are part of the cultural specialness of NexMetro. So I really appreciate your time.
Well, you've been a big part of our culture and developing our leadership too. So thank you. And I'm sure I've learned some of those lessons from you. So appreciate it very much.
Well, of course. I'm a big fan of Josh. I've worked with Josh over the last several years, and I just loved my conversation with him today. As I mentioned, I learned a lot today from him. I learned a few things I want to highlight for us here today. First, he talked about early on that great leaders are selfless. And I think you hear that in how Josh operates and leads. Everything from him being approachable and accessible to being fully present when he sits down with somebody, no matter what they want to talk about, whether they want to talk about business, their personal life, or buying a new car. And he talks so much about the importance of humility and how he looks for that in team members. And that willingness to bring on people and trust them and give them freedom has really led to such a great culture. Last thing, he gave us a nice little practical tip. Why not start with contractors? If you're hiring folks, start with contractors. You can test them out a little bit, date a little bit until you marry, just to make sure that that fit is mutual and you're really getting that person who wants to be there and that is the right fit for your culture. So I know there were many more things in our conversation. I'm sure you took away a few, but with all these conversations on the Leadership Foundry, the key is finding that one thing you can put in place tomorrow that will make you a better leader for your team.